It was 11:47 at night when Colonel Adisa Oyelaran pulled into the parking lot of a Walgreens in Glendale, Arizona. Not a bar, not a club, a pharmacy. Because his wife had a fever of 102 and the children's Tylenol at home had expired 3 months ago, and he was the kind of man who noticed those things. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a grey pullover, a pair of running shoes that had seen better days, 44 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of quiet that came from 21 years of learning when to speak and when to let silence do the work. He'd done 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, commanded a battalion at Fort Huachuca, and was currently serving as Deputy Director of Strategic Operations at the Arizona National Guard headquarters on Papago Park. He did not look like any of those things at 11:47 at night, in a Walgreens parking lot. He looked like a tired man trying to get medicine for his sick wife. He parked in the second row, killed the engine, and was halfway to the entrance when the cruiser pulled up behind his car. The officer who stepped out was young, late 20s maybe, with close-cropped hair and the kind of posture that suggested he was still getting used to the weight of the vest. His name tag read Delvaux. His partner, a slightly older woman with a clipboard tucked under her arm, stayed near the passenger door. "Hey, stop right there." Oyelaran stopped. He turned around slowly. This was not the first time in his life a police officer had spoken to him that way in a parking lot, and because of that history, he knew exactly how the next few seconds needed to go. "Evening," he said, calm, hands visible. "Where you coming from?" Delvaux asked. He hadn't moved from beside the cruiser door. "My house, Sweetwater Avenue. My wife is sick. I'm picking up medication." Oyelaran reached into his back pocket with 2 fingers, produced his wallet, held out his Arizona driver's license. Delvaux walked over and took it without a word, walked back to his cruiser, ran it. Oyelaran stood in the parking lot with his hands at his sides and waited. The automatic doors of the Walgreens slid open and shut twice behind him. A woman with a toddler on her hip walked past, glanced at the scene, kept walking. Delvaux came back. He handed the license back. "We got a call about a man matching your description in this area. There was a break-in 2 blocks over about 40 minutes ago." "I was home 40 minutes ago," Oyelaran said. "You can verify that. My wife can tell you. Our neighbor has a ring camera on the corner. What's in the bag?" Oyelaran looked down at his hands. He wasn't holding a bag. He hadn't gotten inside yet. "I don't have a bag. I haven't been inside." Delvaux looked at him for a moment. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not malice exactly, but something close to it. The particular calculus of a young man in a uniform deciding how much of his suspicion he was going to let drive the next few minutes. "I'm going to need you to come with me." "On what grounds?" "You fit the description of a suspect." "What was the suspect wearing?" A pause. "Dark clothing." Oyelaran looked down at his pullover. It was grey. "I'd like to know what description was called in," he said. "Because right now, all I'm doing is standing in a pharmacy parking lot, trying to buy fever reducer for my wife." "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to come with me. I'm not going anywhere with you without understanding the legal basis for the detainment." That was when Delvaux's jaw tightened. He took 2 steps forward, and his hand went to his belt, not to his weapon, but close enough that it registered as a threat, which was the point. "Turn around." "Hands behind your back. You're arresting me. I'm detaining you for questioning." "Then I want to know the basis. I'm asking you clearly." Delvaux stepped behind him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Turn around, sir." And because Adisa Oyelaran was a man who had spent 21 years learning the difference between a battle worth fighting in the moment and a battle worth fighting later, in a courtroom, in a report, in front of people who would actually listen, he turned around. He put his hands behind his back. He felt the cuffs close around his wrists, and he stood very still. The automatic doors of the Walgreens slid open again. A teenager behind the counter was watching through the glass. The woman with the toddler had stopped by her car and was filming with her phone. "I have identification in my left breast pocket," Oyelaran said. "Not my driver's license, the other identification. I'd like you to look at it." Delvaux was already steering him toward the cruiser. "We'll sort everything out at the station. Officer Delvaux." The voice was measured the way you speak to someone standing at the edge of a cliff. "My name is Colonel Adisa Oyelaran. I am the Deputy Director of Strategic Operations for the Arizona National Guard. I have a military ID in my left breast pocket that will confirm this. I am asking you to look at it before we take another step. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds is going to determine how the rest of your career goes. Delvaux stopped walking. His partner, Officer Reeves, who had been quiet this whole time, spoke up from behind them. "Luke." Her voice had a different quality now. "Check it." A long pause. Then Delvaux reached into Oyalaran's left breast pocket and pulled out the card. He looked at it for a moment, then he looked at it again. The card was issued by the Department of Defense. It had Oyalaran's photograph, his rank, his position. It was not a card you could fake. It was not a card that left any room for interpretation. Delvaux did not say anything for 4 seconds. The parking lot was very quiet. He cleared his throat. "Sir, The cuffs," Oyalaran said. Delvaux uncuffed him. His hands were not entirely steady. Oyalaran turned around and faced him. He straightened his pullover. He took his military ID back and returned it to his breast pocket. He looked at Delvaux for a long moment, not with rage, not with the satisfaction of a man watching another man squirm, but with something far more difficult to look at: disappointment. The particular, exhausted disappointment of a man for whom this was not. "I'm going to go buy fever reducer for my wife," he said. "And then I'm going to go home. And in the morning, I'm going to make some phone calls." He walked past Delvaux, pushed through the automatic doors, and disappeared into the fluorescent light of the pharmacy. Reeves looked at Delvaux. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. What Delvaux did not know, could not have known, because he had not asked, because asking would have required him to think of the man in front of him as someone worth asking about, was what kind of morning was coming. Adisa Oyalaran had not always been Colonel Oyalaran. He had been, at various points, a teenager from South Phoenix who took the bus to school because his mother worked 2 jobs and couldn't drive. A ROTC cadet who graduated near the top of his class at Arizona State. A second lieutenant who landed in Mosul in 2003 with 73 soldiers under his command and brought 73 of them home. A major who designed the logistics framework that reduced supply convoy ambush casualties by 31% across 2 provinces. A man who had stood in rooms with generals and senators and the Secretary of Defense and had spoken carefully and been listened to. He was also, as it happened, close, personal friends with the Adjutant General of the Arizona National Guard, a man named Major General Clifton Prudhoe, who had been Oyalaran's commanding officer at Fort Huachuca 14 years ago, and who had personally recommended him for his current position. And Prudhoe, as it happened, had a direct line to the Maricopa County Sheriff, a woman named Brenda Calloway, who had built her entire second term on a platform of accountability in law enforcement, and who did not particularly enjoy receiving phone calls on Thursday mornings that suggested her platform was not being lived up to in the parking lots of chain pharmacies. Oyalaran did not make these calls out of revenge. He was precise about that later when people asked him. He made them because he believed, still believed, despite everything, that the correct response to a system failing was to use the system to correct itself. You document, you report, you let the mechanisms work. And if the mechanisms don't work, you stand in front of them and you make them work by being impossible to ignore. The calls he made that morning were not angry. They were factual. He gave the time, the location, the name on the badge, the sequence of events. He described what had been said and what had not been said. He noted the lack of any actual suspect description that matched him in any meaningful way. He sent the footage from the woman with the toddler, who had seen the scene and sent the video to his wife, who had seen it on her phone from the couch where she was lying with a 102-degree fever at midnight and had quietly, carefully saved it. By 10 a.m. the following morning, Officer Luke Delvaux had been placed on administrative leave, pending a formal review. By the end of the week, the Glendale Police Department's Public Affairs Office had issued a statement acknowledging that the detainment had not met the department's standards for reasonable suspicion and that a full review was underway. That same day, Major General Prudhoe made a public statement of his own. He did not name Delvaux. He didn't need to. He spoke about the kind of country they were trying to build, the kind of force they were trying to run, and the particular difficulty of being a black man in America, who had given more than 2 decades of his life in service of a nation that still sometimes could not see past the color of his skin to the person standing in front of them. The statement was read into the record at a Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, meeting 11 days later. There is a version of this story that ends with Delvaux fired, Oyalaran vindicated, and everyone going home satisfied that justice has a clean shape and a clear conclusion. But the real story is messier than that, and more important, because Delvaux was placed on leave, not terminated, because the review took 4 months, because when the findings were finally published, they noted a failure of protocol. Without using the word racial profiling once, even though the woman with the toddler, whose name was Tamara O.C. Weston, whose husband had been pulled over 4 times in the last 3 years, without a single citation, who filmed the scene because she had learned to film these scenes, said in her written statement that she had watched this exact scenario play out before, in different parking lots, with different officers, and different men who were not colonels, and did not have military IDs in their breast pockets, and did not have the phone numbers of generals. What happened to those men? She wrote. Nobody called a press conference about. Adisa Oyalaran read that statement. He kept a copy of it in his desk drawer, next to his retirement paperwork, which he had not yet filed. He was asked, in an interview with a local news station, whether he felt that justice had been served. He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man who chooses his words, the way a surgeon chooses instruments. I feel that the system responded when it was pressured to respond, he said. That's not the same thing as justice. Justice would have looked exactly the same on the first night, before anyone knew my rank. He went back to the Walgreens once, about 3 weeks later. He was not buying fever reducer this time. His wife had recovered, gone back to teaching, started her spring semester with the kind of energy she always found after being forced to rest. He was buying coffee filters and a birthday card for his daughter, who was turning 16 and had specifically requested a card with a dog on it, which apparently narrowed the options considerably. He parked in the same spot. Second row, walked to the entrance. The automatic doors slid open. Inside, the teenager who had watched through the glass was back at the register. He was 18, 19 maybe, with the particular look of someone working a job that is not where they intended to end up. He looked up when Oyalaran came in. He stared for a moment, then he said quietly, "Hey, are you the guy from Yeah?" Oyalaran said, "I am." The kid nodded slowly. Something moved across his face that was not quite admiration, and not quite recognition, and was maybe something harder to name. The specific feeling of watching someone handle something unfair, with a kind of dignity you weren't sure you'd be capable of yourself. "My uncle got stopped 3 times last year," the kid said. "Just for driving." Oyalaran looked at him. "What's his name?" Andre Thibodeau. "Does he know he can file a report with the state AG's office, not just with the department, the state level? It creates a different kind of record." The kid pulled out his phone. "Can you say that again?" Oyalaran said it again slowly and waited while the kid typed it in. Then he went to find the birthday cards. The footage from that Walgreens parking lot has been watched more than 400,000 times. The comments, and there are thousands of them, say a lot of different things, the way comments always do when a story touches something that people have been carrying around in their chests for a long time without a clean place to put it. Some of them say, "Fire the cop." Some say, "Justice served." Some say, "This only worked because he was a colonel," and they are right, and that is exactly the problem, and Colonel Adisa Oyalaran would be the first to tell you so. But a few of them, buried down in the thread, with fewer likes, from accounts with no profile pictures and usernames that suggest they are not accustomed to speaking up, say things like, "This is the first time I've watched something like this, and felt like maybe the next call I make will actually go somewhere. I didn't know about the state AG's office. I'm going to tell my son." That is the part of this story that doesn't fit in a headline. That is the part that matters most. The question this story leaves behind is not whether Colonel Oyalaran got justice. The question is, who has to be a colonel to deserve the same treatment he got on an ordinary night in an ordinary parking lot? The question is what we do about every Andre Thibodeau who doesn't have a military ID in his breast pocket and doesn't know a general's phone number and is standing in a parking lot at midnight just trying to get somewhere safe. If you know the answer to that question, or if you're still working it out the way most of us are, this is the place to say so.